Well, hello everybody. Welcome into great atmosphere here on this Friday, March the 1st, first day of Meteorological Spring 2024. I am Zach with you, and man, what a cold and miserable rainy day that we have here in the southeast. We have a shortwave trough that has amplified quite a bit, moved in a lot more moisture from the Gulf up and into our neck of the woods here on the mainland. And it's creating quite a system actually that has cold air coming in, rushing in on the back end, but just obviously not cold enough to make it snow, just cold enough to make it terrible outside. So that is what we're dealing with here in the south. We also are seeing actually rather pleasant conditions in the northeast, very cold temperatures up in the Midwest. They are just getting out of the snow and the severe storms. Crazy system that dropped temperatures from 50-60 degrees in less than 18 hours in some spots up in that region. We also have significant wildfires, which we're talking about today in the Texas Panhandle, and a major blizzard that'll be affecting the Sierra Nevada and the generalized West Coast, Pacific Northwestern, Upper Mountain West regions coming up here over the next few days into this weekend. So let's get started. We're going to take a look at the upper level pattern that we have here. We have our polar jet streak extending down from Alaska, dipping down, creating a surface low in its left exit region area, which is just sitting there and spinning. So any moisture that exists in the middle of the Pacific is just being advected straight on in to the California coast and into those upper terrains and topographical regions of the mountains in Yosemite Valley and Sierra Nevada, Tahoe region, the whole 9 yards. They're about to get blasted with some crazy snow the next couple of days, and that's all to do with the polar jet. With the polar jet being in place, we're getting Arctic air from this region. It's kind of going to be coming around and just being advected straight on in. This general region, wherever the polar jet touches, is generally within that cold pocket. So the Canadian prairie is quite frigid right now, up with the Pacific Northwest as well. And then we have our subtropical jets screaming along, avoiding going into the Baja California and Mexico before getting into a little perturbation in the upper levels that's creating a quite significant amount of diffluence over the southeastern portions of the U.S. today, and that sheer amount of diffluence right there is what is creating a much more of a precipitation event than might have otherwise been previously expected today, and we'll certainly get into that. We can take a look right now at the vorticity readings that were coming out. 300. This is a map that essentially shows upper level divergence. That's kind of what we just looked at, where I was talking about diffluence aloft. You have air that's separating, kind of like spreading out from air molecules are spreading out from one another due to the current flow pattern. And anytime that air is spreading out from one another, it is creating a void from wherever it came from. And the atmosphere does not like void, so you have to fill in that air from somewhere. There's no air, or is not as much air in the stratosphere as there is compared to the lower troposphere, so that air gets advected in from the troposphere, creates a lot of convergence at the surface, and thus we get rising motion over our neck of the woods in the southeast. And with vorticity readings, we are particularly looking for areas that are showing, you see these deep reds, and you want deep reds and deep blues packed in very close to one another. Those are differential vorticity parameters right there, and the closer they are packed together and the more red and the more blue that you see, increases the amount of energy that gets introduced into the system, creating enough of an initiating factor for actual convective initiation to begin in the first place. And we can see that also in the current SPC analysis. We have quite a bit of both positive and negative, or anticyclonic and cyclonic vorticity advection throughout the southeast, creating a very moisture divergent atmosphere. So it's going to be a rainy next probably 12 hours or so before high pressure starts to really build in behind this, and we get this out to sea. But until then, we're expecting quite a bit of rainfall up in this particular region. We can take a look at the atmospheric river transport map with its integrated water vapor transport and analysis. And technically speaking, we do have a significant atmospheric river kind of situated right from the Gulf states up and into the Tennessee and Ohio River Valley. And we have that polar jet making a little bit of an atmospheric river out and into the west coast as well. We could take a look at probably a prettier map of that if we take a look at the mimic satellite imagery that we have here. This is showing precipitable water. So this is essentially if you were to take a big slice out of the atmosphere in one particular region in any of these spots. If let's take a spot right here in the Gulf of Mexico, it's generally green. We would expect to see per cubic meter of that atmosphere slice that you would get about 1.5 inches of moisture within that cubic meter. And obviously the more moisture that you have, the more loaded the atmosphere is, and thus the more humid and the more moisture you have in general to precipitate if you have enough forcing involved to make it happen. So we see that slight band of precipitable water making its way into bands along the west coast, currently hitting the Central Valley of California, and that'll be a continuous pattern that we see going forward. But is a pretty significant amount of moisture that's being put in via the Caribbean and up and pushed up against both the topography and the high pressure systems behind that current shortwave that is causing this little bit of an upwelling to extend pretty far north into the southeastern tier of the U.S. And we can see that highlighted by our dew point map here. So we see dew points extending all the way up and in today. You can see where the topography kind of cuts it off, but we see dew points up in the coastal plain of the Carolinas near 60, southern Georgia, well, in 62s, all along Florida. Well, Florida though is humid, but these are pretty significant numbers for a cold, for it being cold outside, right? So that is generally speaking why we are so wet in this particular region. And the other part to add to the misery is because that shortwave trough amplified a little bit, created a little bit more of an advective force behind it, and thus the wind is actually picked up as this system pushes through. We have wind chill factors now in these regions. 36 in Charlotte, 30 is in the middle of the afternoon too. 36 wind chill factor in Charlotte, 34 in Atlanta, and then we get 44 in Nashville, 40 Roanoke. And then even along the coast, it's only it's still relatively warm, but I mean that cold air is definitely coming. You can see the little arc from that miniature cold front that is pushing its way through and down the slopes, as it were, right now. So quite a cold and frigid and terrible and wet day for the southeast. But I'm sure later in the weekend it'll definitely. Brighter, sunnier, and warmer days are quickly coming behind, as we can see that with high pressure building in, we have a lot of that. We have dry air mixing in from the west that is kind of working to evaporate a lot of that moisture, but it's interacting with the Gulf Stream, or not the Gulf Stream, just the Gulf of Mexico, generalized flow pattern up and in. So we have this air is drying it out. This air is warming it up, and we're just getting warm and dry air to fill in behind us. So that is a sneak peek, I guess, as to what we're expecting in the next couple of days. But another big factor that has been kind of reaching headlines all across the states is the major fire that is currently ongoing in the Texas Panhandle region of the state. So it's called the Smokehouse Creek Fire. You can see it extends pretty much from the center of the state at Lake Meredith all the way over and into the Oklahoma border, into the Cheyenne Indian Territory. And we go down into the details that are available here on the InsaWeb website. Over 1 million acres now has been burned by this particular wildfire. And I know that last year, for the entire year, we had about 2.8 million acres of land in the contiguous U.S. burned last year alone. We're only 2 months into the season, and we're already about 40% of the way there of meeting that estimation. So certainly a very fast start to the wildfire season here in the U.S. and primary contributor to it would be this major fire. And we actually saw kind of how this took place. We had major fire weather warnings all throughout the week, and it was generally saying that, hey, we have to begin the week, we have those dry westerly winds coming down off the mountains that get stronger with the lower altitude that they get. And then in addition to that, they created that fire line that went pretty much all along the Canadian River right here. And then on the back side of it, we had a system that ultimately had air coming from the north. So this full fire line just kind of got pushed down like this. Kind of a nightmare scenario, and it definitely put an impact into the overall containment of this particular fire. I know it's only at about 15% right now, and doesn't look good for the next weekend as well. We have more dry air channeling in behind it with very low relative humidity values, and then in addition to that, we also have increasing temperatures across Saturday as well. Highly anomalous temperature readings. We had, in that particular region will be around 80, which is certainly well above normal. Probably, looking at the anomaly map right there, it's about 20 degrees above normal for that region as of right now. So quite concerning that we're having such problems like this so early in the year. Definitely it could be a major cause for concern if, you know, this pattern kind of lends itself to more of a drought type of atmosphere, especially if the Pacific cools down anomalously, so we get a very negative PNA oscillation, or just generally speaking, if the Pacific waters over here are cold, that's normally a valve shutoff for any Central Plains esque moisture return for the late spring and summer. And if as we can tell, the place is already generally a tinderbox. It's not a good start, certainly, and I'm sure a lot of people are very concerned about that in that particular region. But for areas in the Pacific Northwest, that's certainly not an issue. They have been inundated with moisture, and it's quite cold up there. And they endured quite significant ice storms on top of their pretty significant wildfires that they've had the past couple of years. So everything just seems to be potentially moving east in that regard. So we can take a look at what the main warnings are for across the region today. We have those major winter storm warnings and advisories. Anything in brown would be a high wind warning as well. And then reds would be your blizzard warnings, mainly across the Sierra Nevada and up and into the western Rocky Range and into central eastern Nevada. And then we have winter storm warnings along the Intermountain West into the Salt Lake City, Provo regions of Utah, and then the western or eastern regions of the Snake River Valley, and over near Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and up into the Yellowstone region, up and into Montana and the northwestern portions of Wyoming. And then we have our fire weather warning still extending. We're expecting those katabatic winds to come off of the Rocky Mountain Plateau and just dry this area out even more and create a more strong westerly wind component along with those increased temperatures. Did not get a lot of moisture return, so there's ample fuel in the area. Definitely something to keep an eye on. And then in the upper elevations of the Appalachians, we have some winter weather advisories on the back end of the shortwave trough as it advects in on some temporary cold air into those upper elevations, typically about above 5,000 feet. And then this is quite interesting. So as well, we have, I have taken a look at the WPC snow forecast, probability forecast that is, and if you're, they're forecasting for this region of the Sierra Nevada a over 95% chance over the next 3 days to receive greater than 30 inches of snow. And you know, it stops at 30 inches. So I went and looked at what the Sacramento Weather Office is predicting itself, and this is the snowfall forecast that they have. These are some interesting numbers for sure. We have deep purples that are all next to each other, right? So you can assume that because the scale does not go higher than that, that there are regions in there where the model guidance is suggesting probably more than 100 inches over the next through just Sunday. So over the next 72 hours, some of these regions within the Sierra Nevada range are going to be getting potentially up to 10 feet of snow, which would be insane. That's a lot of snowpack. I'm sure, I mean, it's not certainly a bad thing by any means. After the decade that California has had, this is a miracle to them. But certainly, man, they just keep on getting pounded and inundated. Particularly, this is good for the southern range of the Sierra Nevadas that actually has been left out of a lot of the snowpacking that the Pacific Northwest in general has been. Particularly NorCal has kind of experienced this winter, so it's good to get late season snow. Late season snow is across the western portions of the U.S. what everyone wants to see, because it works to sustain the moisture, the soil moisture for planting and agriculture, commodities, and that kind of thing all throughout the planting season in the spring. So this is the kind of stuff that people definitely like to see across the West. But we can take a look at what the NAM is expecting here over the 3-kilometer NAM over the next 60 hours. We can see high pressure is out to sea at the moment, and it's going to work to potentially maybe slow down this system a little bit, but ultimately, and I'm referring to the shortwave troughing that we're seeing in the southeast, but ultimately we get into, when does this ship out of the southeast? It'll be about midday on Saturday. And then we'll start to fill in with some clearing skies potentially on the back end, and then that system will move up and into the mid-Atlantic, will cause some miserable conditions. And the unfortunate thing for them is that since that low has been sitting over in the Tennessee River Valley for a while, it has been working to actually provide a lot of Gulf Stream warm air advection up and into the Northeast, with the exception of the northern reaches of New England. And that's essentially going to eliminate any chance of a major snow event for the I-95 corridor, and even up and into New England as they get further on and more air mass modification takes place. So it'll just be cold, wet, and windy for the majority of the East Coast at different portions of the weekend. On the back end of it, seems to clear out quite a bit. This area certainly seems to be quite windy, as well as we have our next system that is currently going to be impacting the Pacific Northwest, starts to make its way over the Rocky Mountains and reforms in the northern plains. Already is occluded. Not a lot of moisture at all on the southern end. Most of it contained to the Canadian prairie, and it'll be mainly a major snowstorm for that particular region of the continent. But mainly, I would assume winds would be a major factor to come out of this. In addition, all this time on the back end, we would expect to see an increase in temperatures as well, as the low sits here. Specifically in the northern reaches, the rotation will only work to both amplify the high moisture return, and also work to build any of the dry, warm air that's coming off the Rocky Mountains. It will start making its way up and in here, and that is particularly why we are seeing such a very high temperature readout over the next couple of days across the United States. I had that map set up somewhere. I think I've already seen it, actually. Well, we can see what it's already doing. It's already 70 in Pierre, South Dakota. So I mean, like, you take it you take that for what you will at this moment. And then we can take a look at what the Euro Ensemble is currently predicting. This is out next Friday. We can actually kind of get a baseline of what we're expecting. So we see that major system that's going to be making its way into the Canadian prairie start to kind of rotate around itself with different troughs. And then eventually we go into this pretty much around this time next week. The Euro is pretty solid on a pretty significant trough that'll extend down into the Four Corners region. And this is going to be our next, I guess, potential for this is technically a severe kind of setup. We still have our troughing that comes out of the west, and then we have southwesterly flow over the Tennessee River Valley in the southeast. It'll come down a lot to where that trough axis placement is, as to who gets the majority of that impact. But it certainly does kind of look here. Well, this is interesting. So it has a little bit of a cutoff set up here. So you can see how it's predicting ridging all the way across the majority of Canada, but then you have one little ball low pressure anomaly here. You know, if that sits there, because cutoff lows famously are much slower in terms of their overall progression. They are not fast movers like we saw earlier this week. So there is a potential that could be a significant, that could be our major headline, I suppose, going into next week, if that starts to sit and spin, deepen a little bit even, and work. And especially if this continues, if this polar jet maximum right here continues to amplify and kind of make its way and finagle in, you know, that would be kind of the predecessor, I would say, to a severe weather outbreak, especially if we continue to kind of just live in that warm sector in the southeast. But it's just a lot of moisture, really. I mean, we don't really need much. We don't need much of a trigger by any means. Any you know, shortwave perturbation is going to set off some semblance of showers and thunderstorms. To what degree and severity, we would have to just keep an eye on it. But it's definitely set up for some serious rain going into the latter portions of next week. And we can take a look at the flagship models to see about this time what they're expecting out of it. Always going to look at the Euro first on the right before we look at the GFS for confidence intervals. This is taking a look at Thursday, so it doesn't seem like the GFS is currently on board with a major system. The Euro definitely wants to keep a low wrapped up along the mid-Atlantic, if not earlier, and down into the southeast first and foremost. Interesting, they have a little bit of a wintry return here over New York. I kind of doubt, especially if that system starts to move slowly, and you know, and the northeastern part of the United States generally is under southerly flow for the majority of that time. I doubt that the air mass will still be cold enough for it to be icy on the back end, but we'll see. You never know. And then the GFS comes in a little later. Now for this particular system on Friday, there seems to be a little bit more agreement, generally speaking, across the states. It's just a matter of timing. GFS definitely is a lot more convective in nature, but let's see when the Euro wants to catch up, because the GFS has the crux of its major precipitation occurring more towards the east on Friday afternoon. The Euro is definitely a lot slower, and it keeps the majority of its concentrated convection over in the Mississippi River Valley. In general, the GFS is saying that the low is going to sit somewhere in this kind of region, like in a troughing setup like this, which would create a more of an impact in the southeast, particularly. And the Euro is saying actually it's going to start forming here and then move up, kind of like a panhandle low setup, and then maybe be a trough axis that's more positively tilted, creating a much more rain shield precipitation event over the southeast, and on the front end create more of a severe event in the Mississippi River Valley. Those are the differences, and we have to kind of take those in mind when we are starting to make these forecasts. We know something's out there, we just don't know a lot of the specifics as of yet, but we always start by looking at those ensemble guidances first to kind of give us an understanding of the upper levels and generally speaking what the overall consensus is before we move on and start looking at the deterministic flagship models. Let's see what else. We can also just take a look at what the overall mid-level winds are kind of being expected to do according to the NAM over the next, actually I want to take another look at what this current system is predicted to do according to the NAM. So in terms of timing, we definitely have that high pressure still out there in the Atlantic. Little perturbations that we see across the Carolinas. It definitely reinforces a lot more of a mid-Atlantic system than was previously anticipated. Earlier in the week, it was pretty much only contained to the southeast, maybe even Alabama and Georgia, South Carolina specifically. And now it has kind of wrapped itself up in some moisture and is making its way to make a much more miserable weekend for the Northeast. Just interesting to kind of see that pattern. And then we can see the Gulf kind of open up in addition to the westerly winds. That's definitely going to be your fire weather right there. Yeah, that's not a particularly good look by any means. We have warm, dry air just being pushed out across. It's kind of, if you look at, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's the worst case scenario, but I mean, like, the fire here in Texas has already kind of done this to start and then spread like this, right? and now it's going to have kind of a component like this. So now you might have a more northerly component, and it might, you know, it might work to kind of help contain a lot of the spread that we see in the south, just because if the wind's going like that, it doesn't propagate flames very well. But I would definitely be concerned if I was in these northern regions going into the next few days. We can also take a look at what all the models are generally thinking in terms of total precipitation going through next Friday. Icon saying it's primarily a southeastern and maybe even midwestern event. 2 inches of rain across the majority of the upstate of South Carolina, the Piedmont of North Carolina, all the way and up and into the Chesapeake Bay. Little pockets, these little pockets like this in Georgia kind of show me that this is going to be more of a could be a more spread out convective event. Don't want to say like a discrete warm sector event, but it's certainly not out of the question by any means. And then more of a Mississippi River Valley. GFS generally on the same page, more concentrated into Alabama and northern Georgia. Euro wants to actually keep this and become a little bit more of a coastal low as well, going to soak a lot of the coastline in addition to the problem areas. But it seems locked and loaded that the Alabama-Georgia region will definitely be under the gun for some heavy precipitation coming into next week, and then what that impact is for the rest of the eastern seaboard kind of is up in the air. NWS blend a little bit more east than or a little bit more west into Mississippi for the overall crux than the other models, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on for sure. And that is generally reflected by this experimental guidance from the CPC. Slight chance for heavy precipitation, particularly on March 9th of next week, which would be the generalized weekend next for generally that Alabama region, even extending up and into the western portions of North Carolina, the upstate of South Carolina, and eastern Tennessee. And I would generally say a lot of that might be isotropically, topographically induced. This particular region is gets some of the heaviest rainfall of the entire eastern seaboard in this particular region of western North Carolina. And then depending on how much how strong the trough is will determine how much moisture can be advected north and up and into Tennessee and Kentucky. But that'll be something to definitely keep an eye on. And then we obviously have our major West Coast system that will continue to kind of just berate the West Coast with that, as that polar jet continues to just plunge and go straight into that particular region. Definitely something to keep an eye on for sure. And we can see what the CPC in terms of the temperature and precipitation outlooks. It's largely reflective of where the jet placement is. Above average temperatures in the east, pretty much along the Rocky Mountain corridor. Points east will be above average temps, below average to the west of it. And then yeah, there's no shortage of moisture based off of both of the tropical areas that we generally get moisture from this time of year. We have polar jet that's going to be bringing in an abundance of moisture from the Pacific, and then our Gulf Stream is going to be centered over the southeast, pretty much keeping us particularly moist going into the next couple of weeks into mid-March. So certainly a pretty straightforward outlook, kind of the same regular weather patterns, just kind of going in this 5 to 7 day scale. Very common for this time of year and this transitional period. And in terms of our, I've been getting a lot of questions from colleagues. Is this kind of the end of any chance of winter here or wintry precipitation, at least here in the southeast? And as obviously the days go on, it's looking a little bit less and less likely every day. This particular region of the southeast is pretty much, I think it's like Charlotte and points southeast are in a snout. They're in a snow drought. Last snow was in January of 2022. So they did not get any for the rest of 22 or 23, and they didn't get any at the beginning of 24. And now as we go into spring, now we're going to wait until the end of 24 potentially for our next chance of wintry precip here in the Carolinas at least. And it's never happened before. Usually we get at least a trace every other year, and that kind of makes the record stay. but that is being currently broken and will continue to be broken as we move forward into 2024, it looks like. And I only say that because I look at the MJO guidance, and we've talked about before how the polar vortex is currently situated over Siberia, keeping a lot of those anomalously cold, giant areas of cold air, cold, dry air, contained into that continental air mass. And without a major push from a tropical teleconnection on the other side of the world to kind of upset the apple cart, like usually the Madden-Julian oscillation does a pretty good job of denoting, we're never going to get that. And it's mainly in these phases 8, 1, and 2 that the MJO needs to be in order for that kind of shift to occur. And what it did is essentially in the past month it petered around in 7 and then tiptoed around 8 and went straight back into neutral, and now it's come back and it's restarting now in the west or eastern regions of the Indian Ocean, skipping over Africa entirely, and is going to go potentially straight back into its normal phasing. And based off of what the MJO typically does, once it gets into this kind of pattern, it's kind of hard to break out of it until the next season. It very rarely does the MJO phasing starting in the phase 3 ever really do a full rotation around the world. It typically needs to start in 1 in order for it to do that. So it does not seem like this season, is, at least from the MJO's point of view, is wanting to displace any of that cold air. So I'm increasingly more pessimistic as the days go on that we're going to receive anything. And that's particularly only for the eastern seaboard and the southeast. There's other connections that will say that we definitely have a lot more chance of snow in the central and northern plains. But for our purposes here in this video and this channel, that is just the forecast that I'm currently looking at for snow as it is right now. But that's all I got for you today. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Definitely subscribe to the channel if you're interested in the content. Once again, my name is Zach for Great Atmosphere. I do these videos 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the afternoon. And I primarily focus on the southeast just because that's my base of operations. That's where I have the most experience in my forecasting knowledge. But of course, there's interesting weather all over the place, not only in the U.S. but across the world. I won't be shy about talking about that stuff either from time to time. So I appreciate you tuning in, and I will see you next Monday, or next week's Monday, for another forecasting video. Take care.